the stream. Play the intro. Loopy mood, Brian. This week's show brought to you by Mewtwo, I finally got one, and by Windows 10, which has a really sucky search function.
What's going on, Dre?
How's it going, Brian? So I talked past the start. Love it. All right, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, with me, as always, is our producer, voice of God, and man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, good evening. We've had some great guests to start the year and close out the last one. We're back to the NBA. There's so much going on. All-Star Game, trades, all this crap. Oh, man, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, if you didn't listen to the last two, we had E.J. Fisher and Jessica Luther. Funny, both from Austin. Guess our guest. That was the theme. We had a guest theme month for two shows of people from Austin. So there you go. But we're back to the NBA. As you mentioned, we're going to be talking Jason Kidd getting fired, the All-Star Game. Kevin Durant, an amazing basketball player who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about off the court. Not surprising. Let's just get into it. If you follow the show, you know we have a script. So you know what? We're just going to go through it, Brian. Let's get going. The first couple of stuff is more kind of the nitty gritty business stuff. Some of the homework we're going to talk a month ago now at this point, Brian. We were talking about some television deals and stuff. We were going to maybe talk in the future and said to look up on it. So if you did that, you're ready. If you didn't, that's why you're listening to us, right? To hear us talk about it. So it doesn't matter. I'm wasting a lot of time in this intro, Brian. Okay, so the first one is it does look like legalized gambling is inching ever and ever closer in the United States. I should actually be more caught up with that than I am, given that I have researched it before. But I guess the NBA is potentially looking to try, and you're saying, according to this article from RealGM, they're looking to get 1% of every legal wager, which I'm not a fan of for many reasons, as you know, like if you're talking daily fantasy sports, or you're talking to someone who might actually like to bet on the NBA. That being said, that's definitely fascinating, and if it works for the NBA, that could be huge for them. You know, we've talked a lot about how, if you look at the major sports in the United States, the NBA really is in a great spot going forward, despite getting in its own way sometimes. You know, their mobile product, their streaming product is crap. Sometimes they make silly decisions. You know, this All-Star Game where they had captains, but we don't get to see the actual captains pick the teams is silly. But one of the things they've done is they've really pushed to be behind daily fantasy sports and now legalized gambling. And those things are really drivers behind sports. You know, it's kind of a lie. I've talked about the hypocrisy of the United States to not think that gambling is a huge part of the revenue stream. You know, college sports, right? How many people do March Madness brackets every year, legal or illegally? And illegally meaning you don't report the income or whatever. Betting on sports is such a huge part of sports that the NBA both recognizing it and trying to get in on it. Like I said, for the consumer, I hope this isn't what they get. But for the NBA, if they're pushing for this, if they're starting bid and they get something like this, it's going to be great for them going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I don't want to go into too far into politics, but there's kind of a news story this week that's saying something like the far-right evangelicals are kind of giving politicians a pass on, you know, behavior that before they wouldn't be as okay with, right? That's just kind of happening.
Simple comparison, the easiest one, just put this where it is. You'll know the year better than I will, right? Because Clinton was elected in 92. Mm-hmm. But Bill Clinton, obviously, they impeached him. Now, the official reason was that he lied under oath, but then he was under oath because they were getting him to admit that he, you know, had inappropriate relations with Monica Lewinsky, which, by the way, in hindsight, it's a really weird one. The Cracked podcast has talked about this before. It's fascinating.
It's a complicated subject.
Yeah, very. But so I'm trying to remember the book is called "I Wear the Black Hat." It's, I think, by Chuck Lorre, I think is how you say it. I might be getting his name wrong, but it's very fascinating how kind of as a society we gave Bill Clinton a pass for that when it is really messed up. And in the modern climate, the Me Too era and all this other stuff going on, I'm forgetting. This is how many. It's so weird, Brian. How many basically political men or famous men are doing sleazy things that, even if some of them aren't illegal, we're like, well, that's still inappropriate, right? You shouldn't be
Sure.
arrested for that, but that shouldn't be acceptable work behavior.
This is such a big can of worms because a president having a secret affair leaves them open to like being blackmailed, basically. So that's a totally different issue that I don't want to get into. But I agree with you overall, which is like we have changing views on this kind of thing,
But
right?
the point being, you're saying in the 90s, we basically impeached a president and we didn't even think he was. That's what I guess I'll stress is what's weird is we didn't think he was wrong for the sex. Essentially, we thought he was wrong for the affair. And years later, we've got candidates where the same base that was adamant, oh my God, this guy doing this out of wedlock is unacceptable, are basically giving a pass to much worse people. To the
Yeah,
Roy.
I sort of agree. I'm realizing now I picked a really bad example. So let's move in a different direction.
So
So
you're going with this comparison where the same base, where basically the right base is giving a pass to behavior they wouldn't in the past, and we're talking about gambling. So to
just
that,
America in general, not specifically the right. That was just an example. So
okay. And I'd agree with that. You're right.
yeah.
There are a lot of people that fundamentally thought that was wrong, regardless of which side of the political spectrum.
Well,
they were on.
yeah, so let's go back to the 90s for something else, like just for sports. Like, there wasn't the World Wide Web was kind of around, but wasn't that great yet. So I'll admit it, I used to listen to sports talk radio, back in those days. And every sports talk radio network, if you're talking about your local station or whatever national network, ESPN or Fox or whatever they had back then, they always had like gambling segments, but they'd always be kind of weird about it. Like they'd say, this is for educational purposes only, blah, blah, blah. And then they'd go on and
I think it was Yahoo at one point, they were basically giving the lines and they were told to stop, even though it was like, well, it's very obvious.
yeah. So this has been going back and forth for a long time. And you made a great point about daily fantasy has been fully embraced. And I think this is just kind of the next step. Like the leagues are trying to walk this line where they have to have this kind of bogus morality, for the kids. And we can talk about a million things that are hypocritical in there, like concussions, sexual assault, and all that. So they have to walk that kind of bogus line that they put on themselves and then kind of decide, what will society accept? So it looks like, the NBA has crossed that Rubicon now. They are now into full-on gambling, and they want to take a 1% rake. So, why wouldn't they, right?
Surprised you didn't go for, by the way, is gay marriage, because that is a fascinating trend to look at, where if you look at the popular opinion on gay marriage, or at this point, marijuana use too,
sure.
If you look at either of those, 90s is a perfect example. You go to the 90s, and this idea of either of those things being legal, or even more accurately, a political candidate going and just saying they were okay with them, not having an agenda, not saying they were going to push through legislation. In the 90s, if Bill Clinton had gone out and said, I am okay with gay marriage. And in fact, don't forget, it was a big deal that he smoked a joint at one point. And he was having to explain, well, in college, someone passed it to me, but I didn't inhale.
Yeah,
so
he's the first president that admitted to that, right? No one before him ever did.
Yeah, I completely forgot about the I did not inhale BS thing, where 20 years later, we're going to look at that and go, who cares? So to the same point, gambling, you're right. Like sports betting, we've had like Pete Rose. Pete Rose is basically shunned from the Hall of Fame forever because of that. And we're now reaching a point where everybody who watches sports kind of knows, right? Even the mainstream stuff says the betting lines. You can see the betting lines at Yahoo. There's essentially, the argument of whether daily fantasy sports is legalized gambling or not is very commonplace, right? Yeah, apparently the NBA is like, we are now past that point of no return or whatever.
The Emperor's clothes are finally off on this, right? Like that's really what's going on here. And so then my other thought of it is kind of the legal and economic side. And let's go back to this ESPN article real fast for the quote here. This is, let's see, Brian Windhorst, I think. Yeah, Brian Windhorst. Anyway, so what the NBA is calling this 1% is a integrity fee. And that sounds kind of funny. You laugh at that, right? But, it's true to some extent. So if you're just going to if you're the NBA and if you're whatever states or whatever municipalities rule over gambling, I think it's mostly state commissions, right? For the most part. I mean, it's it's like prohibition on this stuff doesn't work. This is where your marijuana example comes in. So if because there's just going to be an illegal black market and it's going to go unregulated, and if you are worried about the moral sides of gambling, people getting addicted or people getting loan sharked or whatever, then that's when prohibition makes it worse, right? Having the black market makes it worse. So if the NBA is not being full of shit, which they could be, I laughed when I saw this too, if they're being honest here and they actually do regulate it using this money, then that's like a reasonable thing economically. I
think Vegas is the perfect example, because Vegas back in the day was very shady. There was a lot of mob ties. And the real tipping point to Vegas, as I understand it, I'm not a huge historian, so I may be making stuff up. If you know better, put in the comments, whatever, was essentially when it went mainstream. And when it went mainstream, the big money came in. And when the big money came in, basically Walmart, Target, whatever else, right? The NBA counts as a big fish too, right? Is able to just push out the other shady stuff out of the way. And if it goes mainstream, now we get into weird like tobacco territory when you're talking integrity fees, where essentially now what's happening is you are targeting the degenerates, right? You're basically saying
it's a sin tax is what they call it sometimes.
Yeah, that's the true one, right? The sin tax, and that does seem to disproportionately affect people. Another huge can of worms. The basic point I'll give this is very fascinating to see the NBA. Adam Silver has been on board with this for years, so it's not surprising, but they're plowing full ahead, so I will not be surprised to see legalized gambling in the United States in a decade and to see the NBA at the forefront of it. Now, funny note, let's flip back, talking about the NBA being behind the curve in our opinion on streaming and mobile games, and we've talked about that. There's some goodness. Now, ESPN's an interesting boat because they have definitely, they've laid off a lot of people we like. Going for the Waj train is weird to me. We've kind of talked about that before, where this really weird model of aiming to have someone who's going to get the news early. And here's an example. It's two topics ahead, so we'll wait to get to it. But just the point, Waj broke the Jason Kidd firing story. And he apparently broke the Jason Kidd being fired before Jason Kidd knew. So the reason Waj was able to break the story is that in any case of major news of any sort in the NBA, any transaction, whatever, right, there is a minimal amount of due diligence, right? If I'm a GM and you're a free agent, Brian, and I say, hey, Brian, we'd love to see you on the Chicago Bulls for $2.5 million a year, 1 year guaranteed, 1 year player contract, and we'll give you a $500,000 incentive if you score over 10 points a game and 5 rebounds, something like that, right? We might shake hands. And then I hand you a contract, and you basically say, I just need to make sure my agent and lawyer look at this. I'll sign it and get back to you.
All right. Perfect. You see my hand here in cyberspace? Let's do it. Okay.
I don't actually. Yeah, I don't see your camera. I just see me. So I'm shaking hands with myself. We do that. Someone can watch that transaction and go run to Twitter and say, Brian Foster agrees to a 2-year deal with Chicago Bulls, right? That can happen. The reason you beat the news was not because you knew before anybody else. It was because you were essentially reckless. And we've seen this. Like, there was a great Kevin Draper piece, a piece that I interviewed Kevin Draper on the show about and then mentioned Waj, and I'm pretty sure I'm actually blocked by Adrian Washington, which means I have to wait 2 seconds to find out Adrian Washington news as opposed to 1, because everybody on my feed retweets it. But was basically pointing out that Waj will both feed, at least back in the day, so who knows, maybe he's all clear under ESPN. So I'm saying
this article, is at least like 2 or 3 years old, right?
Draper was noting years ago, based on how Adrian Wojnarowski behaved when he was at Yahoo, which was Adrian Wojnarowski would both leak positive stories as essentially favors. So, right, an agent would tell Waj, I want my player to get this contract. So Waj would say, these teams are interested in this player. And it was more seemingly of a favor to get that player's name out because, there are rules about players and teams when they're not under contract with each other, what they are allowed to say with each other, right? Teams have gotten fined for making flippant remarks. I can't remember. I think Mark Cuban or somebody got fined because they're just like, oh, yeah, I'd love to have the MVP. I think it was Kevin Durant or something on my team. And they fined him $15,000 because they were up for a free agency. And they're like, basically, you were trying to, negotiate with Kevin Durant. It was more of a don't do that, an example thing. It wasn't real. It was more telling the other GMs, don't use press conferences to try and say you would like a player. That was a big thing, right, with Paul George and the Lakers. They were saying that when Magic Johnson went on television and was making very positive remarks about Paul George and the Lakers, that he was very clearly using it to negotiate with Paul George. I do believe the Lakers were fined for that. So teams, agents, etc., would use Adrian Wojnarowski to leak information like that. Additionally, Adrian Wojnarowski apparently was in a favorable setup with various teams, so he was leaking news on behalf of teams. And they busted him a few times where they essentially sent out different figures to different teams. So that was the case, and this news, and so the point that Draper was making back in the day about Wojnarowski is that he was basically leaking news on behalf of people in favorable situations, and sometimes just shotgunning it, right? Like he would very assuredly come out with, here's the news I'm hearing. And the annoying thing is, you can say something to the effect of, Brian Foster in talks with the Cleveland Cavaliers for a 1-year deal. You're allowed to say that. If the talks fall apart, you can just say the talks fell apart. So you leak the news early before due diligence, and then no one calls you on being wrong. And that was another point about Wojnarowski. And there was also some speculation, coming back to Draper again, that when Adrian Wojnarowski made it to ESPN, he had some grudges against people who had called him out on some of that stuff before, and those might have been some of the people fired. I'm never getting unblocked by Adrian Wojnarowski. But the point being, when we're talking about that kind of weird news cycle at ESPN, essentially it's just reckless. That's the point. And it actually makes me a little sad when we're talking about the modern media landscape, to keep this show political, Brian, of the fact that it's just news travels so fast and we don't have fact checkers, and people put things out of context. So it's like, I'm not a fan of that. But that being said, you are noting that ESPN and SportsCenter. So I'm about to compliment ESPN, so I had to preface it with a huge bashing of both ESPN and
can I say one thing about that real fast before we go to this article? It's really funny you bring that up, because the title of the article ends up being, and I forgot about this until we brought this up again, basketball's biggest reporter is waging a war on ESPN and he'll do anything to win. That's the title of the Kevin Draper article. So it's funny that he's actually at ESPN now.
Basically, that's how the funny thing about a lot of these things, right, is you basically want to get big enough to where they have to give you a ton of money.
Yeah.
On board, and then now everybody's making fun of Wojnarowski because other people are beating him to stories, and I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about the model of, dear God, we need to know this story a day before it happens because Brian is talking to his agent. We're not gaining anything, and if anything, we're just spreading more misinformation and rumors. And in sports, that doesn't matter, but it's more indicative of other things. So sorry about that.
I'll just say this real fast, then we can move on to this article. It's a difference of reporting versus inserting yourself into the story, right? Like, I mean, theoretically, I'm not saying this happened. I'm sure it didn't. But theoretically, he could come out and hear that they're like really close to firing Jason Kidd. And then he reports it. Jason Kidd hasn't heard this yet. Then everyone knows. And then the Bucks are like, guess we got to fire him now, even though we weren't totally sure yet,
One example of him doing that is the draft, right? Adrian Wojnarowski's feed, and I think Mark Stein's feed last year was doing this, we're reporting the draft picks before they happen. And that's just ridiculous, because the draft is set up to where you have to wait to announce what you're going to do. So you've got a game with rules in place. You've got someone who's looking ahead and coming out and going, I'm giving you news. It's like, you are not giving me news. You are merely taking advantage of the fact that the system they have set up will not let me see it until this point. That's not anything, that's not anything different than, like reporting the results of a tape delayed game, for those of you old enough to remember that being a common thing for live sports. And then acting as if you are important for it, as opposed to just saying, I have access that you don't.
Yeah, it's just like there's this spectrum of news, as terms of like analysis and really evergreen solid stuff being on one side, and then to breaking news, and then to rumors all the way on the other side, right? And these reporters like Wojnarowski are just finding this sweet spot where you can cut out some of the fact finding, and you get a couple things wrong, but if you just get most of it right, that's probably good enough to get a lot of page views but still keep people's trust. It's really interesting what that sweet spot is. You obviously think it should be farther towards the fact-checking side, and I probably do as well, but it's really interesting. Anyway, I'm ready to move on from this.
Okay, so in spite of all that, you noted that SportsCenter, noting the change in demographics and change of how people consume things, a lot of people are cutting the cord, they've gone to Snapchat, and you're saying, according to awfulannouncing.com, that apparently is going pretty well.
Yeah, that's right. And I can't remember why I picked Awful Announcing, but a few people were reporting this, that they've been getting something like 2 million views on these Snapchat sports centers. So Yeah, I'm like, maybe ESPN is finding, some found. What's the analogy I'm looking for here? The axiom. Anyway, some found money
Oh, yeah.
on, on cord cutters. It's one interesting thing about this is, I think Katie Nolan is one of the anchors, and she kind of languished at Fox under contract for a while.
You lucky Otto. So thank you very much. I was looking at Yahoo announcing that Verizon was going to bring mobile games. That's our next story.
Yeah.
So I had to get that up in front of me. And Yahoo, who we've said nothing but great stuff about so far, had to have an autoplay ad for Verizon of all things. So there you go.
Yeah, but overall, like 2 million visitors per day is like a huge show. So yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I'm interested to see it. I'm interested if the format is the same or different, or what they're doing with this show. But I'm just kind of, let's do this what the real millennial podcasters would do, Dre. I can make fun of them because I'm not one. Let's put a pin in this and, watch this space.
There was a very interesting South Park about this at the beginning of the day, and it's if anything gotten weirder, which is South Park was talking about monetizing on the internet. And this is something really interesting where I don't think people understand how often being internet famous or going viral, how little that does for you, how little money that makes you, and it's only gotten harder, right? The ad revenue from Google and stuff has gone down. They just changed their policy where if like I was pushing to get us to 100 followers, and we finally did on YouTube. I'll figure out what that does for us. You were saying there were some features it unlocks, so we'll have to do something with that, Brian. But we finally got above 100 followers, and then Google came out, and it's not like we monetized our videos or that we'd make very much, Brian. We wouldn't even make enough to like pay for our hosting, but Google just changed its policy, so you have to have over 1,000 followers or subscribers on YouTube before you're eligible for monetization. They're trying to cut out these like viral tiny things that go, that get a lot of followers and ad revenue for saying horrible stuff. But that being said, it has been, and so back to the South Park, they had a funny episode at the beginning about how hard it is to monetize the internet, even if you're famous on the internet. And we're still seeing that where the really, really hard part about conventional streams, we're talking mainstream media, they're dying, but newspapers and magazines, we're talking cable television shows and the internet, is there are more people on the internet, but they're just not able to figure out how to monetize that the same way as these older streams, right? That's been a big problem with popular television shows. I'm a fan of Community. I'm a fan of 30 Rock. Both of those shows, critically acclaimed shows. Lots of people watch them on the internet. They just could not find a way to make money with them. So that's where this gets fascinating, is that I don't think it solves the problem when you said they found money, but if they at least are starting to migrate to that space, and then that space becomes, it's the exact same comparison we were making about gambling. When the legitimate players, when IBM entered the computer market, that's when the computer market got serious, right? That's when it went from people in garages making kits that they were selling for $100 at a store to being a legitimate thing that businesses would actually invest in.
I'd say personal computing market, right? Like home.
Yeah, you're absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny to think about that. So making us feel old, or anybody who doesn't already feel old listening to this podcast. Yeah, there was a point in time where a computer was a room or a building that took many, many engineers to put together. Maybe if you saw Mad Men, right? They had to like have an engineering squad come and construct a room that was a computer that was basically weaker than a TI calculator. That's one of my favorite digs that people give on the internet still, where they insult the analytics person. And they'll say, you nerd with your TI calculator. And I'm like, I haven't had a TI since I was forced to buy one for a college class. Where the college class requirement, like you were only allowed to bring in a TI 83 or whatever to the test. So, of course, you bought one. I have access to supercomputers now. I have access to supercomputers that would make people in the 80s feel jealous. So that just gets funny. But so to that point, yeah, the personal computing market, it's when the real players got involved. It's kind of annoying because you go, there were people doing good work in this space. There was better stuff. Arguably there are better content providers, et cetera, in that space than ESPN. But if ESPN comes into that space and actually puts some push behind it, that space could become relevant and then make money. And then, of course, the hard part is the internet's kind of in the wild, wild west. And some people, not us, but some people have found ways to make a living at that. Usually when you modernize and legitimize a space like that, you push out some of the bottom, but that could be good or bad. We'll see.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was seeing some tablet commercial on TV the other day, and they're just talking about the features, and there's just this girl sitting there using a tablet, and one of the parents comes up and says, hey, what are you doing on the computer? And she's like, what's a computer? So we've gone full circle there, I guess. Tablets are not computers. But just to finish off this Snapchat thing, one piece from the article is, and again, these are, I think what this is ESPN people reporting internal metrics. So, who knows? I don't think this is public stuff, but they're 75% of those 2 million per day unique viewers are between 13 and 24. So this solves their age problem that they're having. So, we'll see. Like, it's, I think a lot of people would just say why ESPN should just die and new media should take over, but they're still a big player.
What's fascinating, I saw a really interesting thread today about the comic book industry, which is fascinating, which is there was this point in time where back in the day, comics used to be very cheap items that were sold at newsstands for a cheap amount of money. And then there was this shift in about the 90s where they thought the direct-to-consumer market, that is comic book shops, was a better model than the newsstand shop. So basically, comics stopped being seen as this cheap thing that everybody could buy at a newsstand.
And they were better made at times, too, right? There were graphic novels and all that, better quality printing.
But what happened is they essentially lost a generation of fans because instead of having children who could buy this for cheap and they were disposable, they were only selling to adults and the adults aged out. So for ESPN, essentially, it's also like the wrestling model, WWE, where if you don't find a way to entice those new fans, ESPN, like the people saying it should just die, well, it will. It'll just age with its market and die if it doesn't. And what I'm saying is I don't see a problem if it at very least enters this market and gives it some legitimacy. If ESPN isn't the person that takes us to the future, that's fine. I just like seeing the space legitimized. On the same note, I'm not going to click on the link again, Brian, so you're only going to get a cursory amount.
I have it here. I'll show it to the viewers.
But Verizon and the NBA are announcing a new deal to bring live NBA games to mobile devices in the U.S. Probably love it. Just make it better, NBA. It's been so bad for so long, and it's a joke now. Like, I don't know if you've seen. I was talking about this a few weeks ago, Brian. When you go to NBAcom, they'll say, "Hey, do you want to watch this game? You can pay $7.99 a la carte." It's like there is a market for me to watch a game on my phone. You just have to make it stream at least as well as a recently updated YouTube video and not cost an arm and a leg. So to the same point, I think the NBA has a market on digital. I hope they find it. And at the very least, if they have a deal with Verizon, depending on where net neutrality goes, depending on other things, it is definitely beneficial to have a carrier on your side. I mentioned Pokemon Go at the very, very start of the show. I might mention at the end just to brag about getting a Mewtwo today. But when they had Pokemon Go Fest in Chicago, an issue they had is a bunch of the carriers just could not handle the load, and the only carrier that was able to do it was Sprint because they actually brought along portable towers essentially to help it out. So it is beneficial to have a carrier on your side if you're going to do mobile stuff, especially if the way net neutrality is going. So hopefully it's at least done well. So, I mean, basically, I'm giving the NBA a pat on the back for where they're headed for the most part. I'm just asking if they improve it.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out exactly what was going to happen by reading this article. This is Dan Devine on Yahoo. There's some other articles as well, but I think they're just adding this to League Pass. So if you have League Pass, you can just do this on your phone. But I don't know if that's going to change the pricing. It seems like they don't have a la carte, but I might be wrong. Anyway, I should have read this article closer, but I can't figure it out.
I mean, what I'm hoping is that if there's a partnership like that, then it improves the product because you're at least doing it with someone that can do it right. Because like we've talked before how the NBA's foray into digital rights has just been a complete failure. So that's what we'll give them. Same point, the millennial point. We'll stick a pin in it. Let's talk a bit about Jason Kidd getting fired. So as we mentioned, shoddy journalism in my opinion. You beating a company doing due diligence does not make you good news. It makes you a gossip rag. But Jason Kidd was fired. And there's a lot to say about this where I don't know where to point the blame, at least point out an elephant in the room. I actually do like the guy, or at least have liked the guy on Twitter. So Seth Partnow, formerly of Nylon Calculus, is the director of analytics for the Milwaukee Bucks. I'd like some of his writing and work over at Nylon Calculus. Obviously, you know us, the curmudgeonly guys. We don't like everybody. And I find that, like, this is a weird space where when you criticize people, it's taken as a personal jab. But that being said, when he got a position for the Bucks, somebody made a comment about the wins produced metric, and he responded to them. I don't listen to anything the wages of wins people have to say. So I've always got, if you look right here, there's this, my shoulder, there's a little, I'm going to see a massage therapist in a day or two, but I got like a little chip there, Brian. I'll have him check.
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah. I'll have him check it out. Yeah. Just, it's maybe a big chip. Who knows? But there's a chip on my shoulder over here. Admittedly, though, so the Bucks, it's a very interesting bit of Schadenfreude where I really like Giannis Antetokounmpo.
He was kind of nice to us back in the day too. Maybe he changed his mind.
That was just a weird comment that kind of got to me. So whatever. So and the issue I have with the Bucks is I don't know where to point the finger, because Jason Kidd, we were talking this pre-show. There are two kind of models of coaching. Dave Barry in Stumbling on Wins talked about the Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich coaching thing, which is namely how the coach, or at least the system, impacts player development. And so what Dave Barry noted, there were some coaches, the key ones among them, Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich, were these people that, based on everything else, a player playing under them would see a bigger increase in production than just normal age curve, et cetera, or playing for kind of a neutral coach. So it's hard to know Jason Kidd with that, because I would definitely argue Giannis improved more than we would expect with him. I thought he was a great player, on pace to be even greater, and he's turned into an MVP candidate. And Tony Snell, we were joking about this pre-show. You made an inadvertent rhyme that I loved for him, Brian. You said, Tony Snell does nothing well. Love it. He's an average player now. Still don't think he's worth the contract he got, but whatever. Maybe Jason Kidd helped improve those players. Now, admittedly, Matthew Dellavedova went from being a below-average player in Cleveland to being terrible, so who knows? There's that side, and then the other side, this is what Arturo has talked about in the past, which is, does the coach play the right players? And the Bucks, I wrote an article about this earlier this year, have like some major flaws with some players they're playing. If you don't have it up in front of us, I'm assuming you'll get up in a second, Brian. But if we look at the Bucks, obviously their best players this season are Giannis and John Henson. The odd part about John Henson, though, is John Henson's only gotten 1,100 minutes, and if we scroll down to the bottom, we'll note that Thon Maker's at 800. So why the hell aren't they playing John Henson more minutes? If we go back a season to the 2017 season, their two best players were Giannis and Greg Monroe. And what we'll notice about Greg Monroe is Greg Monroe got 1,000, played under 2,000 minutes, played 1,800 minutes last season, despite being the second best player on the team. I'm sure we'll get some flack about defense or whatever. The point just being the box score numbers said Greg Monroe is their second best player. And we will also notice the same thing. Thon Maker, let's see, I'll try and sort by position, but Thon Maker got 500 some odd minutes. John Henson was good, but got 1,000 minutes, but worse than Greg Monroe. So just this oddness of the best players haven't been getting played, and they actually, outside of their top couple of players, don't have a great squad. Eric Bledsoe, we like that trade. He's been an average guard, but hasn't been close to his top levels. A lot of that could just be coming back from injuries. So what it really boils down to on this team is, I don't know if it is Jason Kidd's fault for not playing a smart rotation, or if Jason Kidd is following the mandates of the front office to play Thon Maker, and it really just, outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo, is just not a good team.
And I think that last part is what's the most important thing. Maybe expectations were too high. Maybe Giannis is so good that maybe he's got the Kevin Love problem right now, where when he was on the Timberwolves, which is why he was a really good player, but his team stunk. So he was called hollow stats or whatever. I mean, it's tough to say. But yeah, I mean, I think the coaching side of playing the right players is nitpicky, in that what you're saying is probably right, but I don't think it matters for the Bucks. They just don't have very many good players, right?
Some other ones that get rough. I'll give you Eric Bledsoe and Chris Middleton as an example. The reason people get fired in NBA organizations is a disconnect between expectation and reality. That's always what happens.
Yeah.
And the coach, I've argued, is a sacrificial lamb to when a team is underperforming what the front office thinks they're capable of. Now, admittedly, in the past, we have liked Chris Middleton, and we have liked Jabari Parker, and we have liked Eric Bledsoe.
Parker's on their G League team now, I believe. They demoted him.
He's not playing, though, which is annoying because I would actually go out and watch the G League team play if he was actually going to get played. But so here's the point. Chris Middleton, his third year in the NBA, looks fantastic. Follows the age curve, looks like a great player. We are excited. His fourth year doesn't quite live up to that, but is still an above average player. Gets injured in his fifth year, that's last season, and injures playing about average, and this season has been a below average player. So Chris Middleton is getting the most minutes on the team, but is a below average player coming back from injury. Eric Bledsoe getting lots of minutes, average player, but not close to his top level. Malcolm Brogdon was a very good rookie, is playing average this season, but not close to levels he was last year. And it could just be, he could have just had an outlier-ish rookie season. Tony Snell's actually outperforming, but again, he's just at average, not great. So if this team thinks that Chris Middleton and Malcolm Brogdon and Tony Snell and Eric Bledsoe are better than they are, the numbers say they are basically average to, in Chris Middleton's case, significantly below average, they have a worse team than they think they do. Now, it's possible that's Jason Kidd's fault, but given the fact that two of those players I rattled off are coming back from injury, and one of those players is a sophomore, I do not think that this team, and this is where I get to keep rubbing the chip on my shoulder, I don't think that the personnel decisions this team has done in the last couple of seasons, given the fact that they have Giannis, are that impressive. Eric Bledsoe was to a degree, but then the fact of the matter is the reason I liked that trade was more that it was a Kenneth Faried situation. I thought Greg Monroe was a good player that's not getting played. And if you've got a good player that's not getting played, that's eating lots of your salary cap, just trade him and get someone who's actually going to get played. It's the same art. Like Kemba Walker's allegedly on the block. If Kemba Walker's on the block and the Nuggets can get him and trade, like Faried for him, abso-freaking-lutely. Like, just get a player that you're actually going to give minutes to.
I think Jordan said that they're not going to trade him, but that's just something he said. Like, who knows? They still could.
I will say, as soon as a player has been put on the block and you take him off the block, that doesn't tell other teams to stop calling.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
Anyway, I just do not think the personnel decisions this team has done in the last couple of seasons have been that spectacular. We didn't like Tony Snell. We didn't like Matthew Dellavedova. We like, but not for that contract. So
and he's playing pretty bad this year.
Yeah, I think that basically this team had really high expectations in large part because Giannis had a much bigger jump than you would have expected last year and has basically kept it up.
Well, and for me personally, I was expecting Bledsoe to keep playing well, and there's a lot of time left, but he's a little disappointing. I think. Go ahead.
We've said this forever. Sorry to cut you off. I'll let you right back in. We've said this forever. Injuries are the hardest thing to predict, and
it could be.
You and Patrick both have had examples of you guys having to do rehab, and saying just how hard that is, and how normal NBA fans just don't realize how much work, like you mess up your shoulder, how much work that takes to get it back up and stuff. So it's like, it's really, when we're saying these players looked really good in the past, where are they now? It's like they could look at us and go like, I do several hours of physical therapy a day and still practice and still play, thousands of minutes of NBA games. Like it's not necessarily going to come back right away.
Yeah. I mean, an example is, in our local Warriors announcing team, a former NBA player has been joining the team the last couple of years. Kalena Azubuike, you probably remember him, played for Kentucky. He was a really good three-point shooter. And I always thought, man, he was a good player. He retired kind of young. What happened to him, Just hearing him talking on the broadcast, it's just like, well, his knee is just totally shot, right? Like, he probably retired just because he couldn't play anymore. So it's like it's a tough, really tough physically to play pro sports, to have the biggest understatement of the show.
Yep.
But so, okay, here's two things about that Bucks coaching situation that's reporting wise anyway that I want to throw in there. So the first is this is from the Bucks Bleacher Report page. I don't have it up right now, but anyway, basically the players didn't like him. He supposedly has an old school approach, and he would play mind games with the players where he would tell them one thing and do something else, and stuff we've heard about before. So if you and I are all of a sudden like teleported into the past, and we are the owners of the Bucks, and we have to decide what are we going to do with this guy Jason Kidd, and we have all this knowledge, right? Well, the roster's not that great, and maybe he's not doing a great job with it, but he's not doing a terrible job either. But then also all the players hate him, and he's just like backstabbing people. And I'd be like, yeah, well, let's fire him. I think all those things combined are good enough, right? If he's, if you think you have a really good coach, like when the 76ers were bad, they really like Brett Brown, then yeah, keep him. But if you don't, and you don't think the coach is good, and the coach is being a jerk, I can see why they want to get rid of a mediocre jerk, if that makes sense.
And then also, I mean, I heard some people say that Giannis really liked him. In large part, I think they put the ball in his hand. Well, let's just point out there's a few fun notes there. One, Giannis has signed his guaranteed deal, so he has no leverage, right? He has no leverage. And I don't like this from kind of a moralistic standpoint, but I do like it from a pragmatic, egghead, how teams should be run standpoint. The team can look at Giannis and go, we have your bird rights. We have your long-term deal. You can play. If you don't play, we can find a way not to pay you, right? We can go to the league and say we're not obligated to pay him, and then he's not able to go anywhere else. I'm okay with that. And then to your point, like, yeah, if he's not working out with the team, it's like the Mark Jackson point. Mark Jackson may very well have been a good coach. It appears like he was. If he doesn't fit there is something to be said for getting along with. And in fact, the funny thing is coaches are middle management. I think it's a rough one, but for most coaches, it really is just about getting along with the players and making sure that everybody kind of gets along well together. So if he's not doing that, I'm okay with it. I guess my point is, if Jason Kidd is fired because he just doesn't fit, that always, as I mentioned, the cultural fit or whatever always bristles me the wrong way a little. But I don't hate that as much as if they're pointing the blame and saying we are underperforming and we are blaming you. Now, I feel it's that second one is the reason he got fired, but who knows? I think we've kind of done, without having inside knowledge, we've done the dance around enough on the Bucks. And basically all I'll say is the Bucks have done the hard work. They got a start. They have an MVP caliber player on their roster. Just get some decent players. Just stop playing Thon Maker. It's not that hard, and you'll be a better team. Future coach, listen, bench Thon Maker. You bench Thon Maker, you're going to look better than Jason Kidd immediately. Just that's all you have to do. In terms of why he's fired, who knows? We're basically saying we don't necessarily disagree with it. We don't necessarily agree with it. And without more news, we can't say more.
I've got one more kind of insider thing that might shed light on this or maybe not. This was from Ben Falk, who used to work for the 76ers and the Suns or someone else. I don't know him that well. I just know he's a former NBA guy. He has a website called Cleaning the Glass, and he wrote a great title for this article, Do the Bucks Stop Here? And he kind of went into a coaching thing, right? He wrote a lot. He put a lot of videos up and did some other stuff. And just to cut to the chase, there is a quote that I pulled from this article that I thought summed up pretty well. So the Bucks defense is basically their problem with why they're losing, is what he's saying. They're something like 25th in the league. And he says that it's not a result of laziness, poor defensive personnel, or poor execution. In fact, the Bucks execute this style of defense, which requires an enormous amount of coordination, effort, and precision. And they execute it remarkably well. That's a testament to their coaching. So he's saying Jason Kidd is a good defensive coach. But the scheme itself means that no matter how well it's executed, you will see these types of results.
That
he goes to the old school side, right? That it's just...
So can I give a preemptive shout out?
Sure.
I don't even know if I'll be able to find this in time, but I got to give a shout out to Coach Nick, because B-Ball Breakdown on Twitter. If you're watching us and you don't follow him, I don't know how. Like what it means is you accidentally clicked unfollow at some point, obviously. So anyway, B-Ball Breakdown on Twitter. Coach Nick was talking about like old school coaching mentalities and how coaches need to update themselves, and how he was talking like what he brought up in this thread that I may or may not find. Probably won't find, Brian, because it's not on the script, and I've reduced the amount of extra work I want to do. But what I was going to say is he basically said there are drills that coaches would run that are ineffective, that are useless. Like, I mean, imagine if you had a coach that had players take half-court shots 100 times every practice. And you and to your point, got them really good at making those half-court shots. They're making them at 5%, which is probably pretty good. And you go, what the hell use is this?
Yeah.
You might have, if you're lucky, you will get 4 half-court heaves a game because you are out of, it has to be the exact right situation, right? You are out of time, you have the ball at the half-court line, and you want to beat the buzzer. That is the only scenario where, and that's at most 4 times a game. And that's a rare circumstance, right? Because you're not always going to have possession, et cetera. You would go, why the hell are you running this drill? So Coach Nick brought up there drills that coaches run that are just ineffective, that aren't useful in games, and that coaches need to update their mindset. So what you brought up is a funny thing, because you're basically saying Jason Kidd is good at getting people to listen to him and may be good at player development, but he is not good at having them listen to him for something that is effective, which, basically is our, we'll see how long we go over, but like talking Kristaps Porzingis and other players that we think are immensely talented as NBA players, but we call below average because they basically make poor decisions. So that's a fascinating point.
So, it's possible the Bucks front office saw their team defense regress and saw, Middleton and who's the other in Brogdon we're talking about. I'm like, yeah, this is the fault of Kidd's defense. I don't know. So anyway, it's your point about it's a black box and we really don't have enough information to judge is true, but based on these few things I've gleaned and just knowing, it's Jason Kidd's been involved in some reporting and non-basketball stuff that he's maybe not a great guy. I'm not going to pile on because I don't have a ton of info on it, but
it might be a hard, and it's funny. I still can't call myself a Bucks fan. I'm close. Like, I've Brewers, yeah, sure. I like them. But Bucks, I'm a Giannis fan. I'm not a Bucks fan yet. I just can't. And basically what I would note though is, to your point, they might be right for firing him for a variety of reasons, but if people are expecting a team to improve,
amen.
Yeah. All right. I have nothing to say. The Timberwolves offense is unconventional. I have not read this article and we've already gone over, so I'll call that a shout out.
We can talk to Patrick about it later, maybe.
Check Ian Levy, who is talking about, did he do that for NBAcom?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So Ian Levy, one of our favorites, wrote this for NBAcom. That's right. Big leagues, Ian. So awesome. Wrote about how the Timberwolves offense is unconventional. You wanted to get this out. Of course, it's odd. You're the Golden State fan, but you want me to call out your MVP, finals MVP. So obviously this showdown, man, if this doesn't happen in the playoffs, it's going to be such a bummer, because the same thing happened, right? When the Spurs and Warriors were two of the greatest teams we'd ever seen and the best two records in the NBA, they didn't play each other in the playoffs. So if we are robbed of the Rockets Warriors this year, I'm going to be so effing pissed. But anyway, I just played again, and the Rockets won, Brian. The Rockets won. And then
the narrative has flipped again, Dre. After every show we have, it flips.
And then Clint Capela came back and said, we're just a better team, which we've talked about. We don't, the numbers don't support what he's saying. Had something in my there. The numbers don't support what he's saying. And we're thinking playoff rotation. That's not going to happen. Playoffs, unless the Warriors do something stupid like deciding that Nick Young is who they want to go with against Eric Gordon. The playoffs are just going to be on the Warriors side.
He was in that lineup when they closed the game. Nick Young was.
But so the point is, KD said, the fact of the matter about, basically made the point we've heard so much mainstreamish, which is KD said, Capela's running his mouth, but for Capela, it's easy. He's on a team with these great passers. And so all he has to do is get the ball underneath the hoop. He's not doing anything. As I mentioned, this quote showed up in Love and Basketball when they're talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because it's a period piece. And so they're talking about Kareem in the 80s and saying Kareem's not talented. All he does is get underneath the hoop. We've heard this forever. This player, Tyson Chandler's not a good scorer. All he does is take shots underneath the hoop or whatever, right? And the metaphor I've given it is it's basically football, right? There are wide receivers, and their job is to get open. They do this without the ball, right? Running backs have the ball. The quarterback has the ball. The wide receiver, their job is to run around and get open, and when they get open, they get the ball passed to them. And players like Kenneth Faried and Clint Capela and Tyson Chandler, the reason they are great is because they are able to find those easy shots, because, of course, everybody in the NBA wants to take the shot from 0 to 3 feet. Everybody in the NBA is great at that shot, with the exclusion of Rajon Rondo and Ricky Rubio, which is baffling. Everybody wants to take that shot. If everybody was able to just get 5 of those shots free a game, they would all take them, but they can't get them. And so the metric I went up with is I looked. So Clint Capela has 14 points, 10 rebounds, shooting above 60% effective field goal percentage. Of course, admittedly, the people that tend to put up those numbers, that's field goal percentage because they don't shoot threes. That has happened a grand total. I said it in the tweet, right? I think
you did. I have it up right now. It's happened 17 times by 9 players.
And by the way, here is a fun just note I'll give whenever you're talking about this has happened and you have to bring up players. If you are using the name Wilt Chamberlain in your comparison, if you have to go back that far to bring up that name. And I understand that Wilt Chamberlain once played every minute of every game for a full season. That is never going to happen again. He played 48 minutes, like 48 point something minutes a game, because, overtimes. And and also we've mentioned the pace was way faster. So when you have to invoke the name Wilt Chamberlain to make your point, like if I remove Wilt Chamberlain from that list, it drops to 8 players 15 times. Artis Gilmore too. Same.
Charles Barkley's on there 3 times. Dwight Howard, Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Got some good names.
Best all-time centers on this list.
So the point I made was, it's not that easy, right? Like, and I will fully give you, if you want to tell me who is a better player, Durant when he's healthy, because he started the season rough, but he's coming back. Durant or Capela, I'll give you Durant. If you want to ask me who's more skilled, Durant or Capela, I'll give you Durant. If you want to tell me what Capela does is easy, that is bullshit. Players don't do this.
And very important to winning.
Exactly. Important winning and not easy. That's what annoys me is when people say things like you overvalue rebounds or you just like people that get easy shots. It is a very important thing to just point out. They're easy shots, but that doesn't mean they're an easy shot to get. If it was easy to shoot from 0 to 3 feet, everybody would do it, but they don't.
And I think this is just kind of a narrative thing in that it's like, okay, you have Clint Capela, and he comes in the league, 3 years ago or whatever. You have James Harden, who's a shooting guard. And then all of a sudden, James Harden turns into this great point guard, right? And has an all-time great point guard season. And Clint Capela gets better as he gets older. And like, that's great. Well, also you had, Chris Paul. So you have 2 great point guards now. And now Capela's even better.
Shout out to, this was back in the day, R.A. Caroline with the floor stretch, where the odd thing he was noting was that essentially most teams were misplaying their lineup. You're talking about optimizing the 5 positions. Most teams are using a shooting guard as this basically mid. How am I missing the second word here? Like between not past 3. Oh my God, this is an embarrassing word to forget.
I don't know. Sorry.
Mid-range for basically, right?
Okay. They're
using Kai Willinghans affectionately calls these shots shit shots. Like 10 to 16 feet. They're the worst shot to take. Most teams were misusing their shooting guard. They're basically trying to use their shooting guard to space the floor by taking inefficient shots. Your exact point on Jason Kidd, right? They were good at doing it, but it was an inefficient thing to do. And so a very interesting question is, why don't you just play 2 point guards next to each other, provided they're sized enough, right? Because there is some size mismatch sometimes. Why don't you just play 2 point guards next to each other? They can both distribute and both shoot from long. And the Warriors have done that. One of the things that makes me happiest about the Warriors, at least with their modern 3-ball strategy and like 2 point guard strategy, is like they're using R.A. Caroline's floor stretch and Arturo Galletti's like take more threes, which does tickle me pink that they're doing. So it's kind of a funny point when people are saying it's easy or whatever. It's like, yeah, these strategies aren't easy to do. They take the right piece, but it's funny that more people, if it was so easy to do it, why aren't more people doing it?
Yeah, that's right. And so that narrative I laid out is what people, I think, are thinking what happened right here. They see Capela getting better and better and better. That's his player arc. And then they see Harden becoming this good point guard, and then Paul adding on. Clearly, this is Durant's narrative, right? But I think if you look at the numbers, and this is, let's bring up this article right now. This is Patrick's from a few years ago, 2013, a low usage myth.
Yeah, I love this.
And he looks at some of these players, right, and why it's so hard to do. Arguably Capela is not that low usage. He's kind of medium usage. But anyway, yeah, like the point is not many players can do this, right? And the thing is they change teams, though. So Chandler's been in the league for a lot of years. He's played for a lot of different teams, a lot of different really good teams, and he's been able to be this effective, low scoring, high percentage player.
Example?
Go for it.
So one thing that makes me happy, Chris Paul left the Clippers, and we still think DeAndre Jordan is one of the best players in the league.
Perfect example. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about it as the All-Star game. I'm not going to give too much time to this. We'll talk a little bit about snubs. So the All-Stars were voted in. The All-Star reserves were assigned by the coaches. We have some opinions, but I found over the years I've been muted. But one of the players that didn't make it, shockingly again, and I say shockingly in a derisive tone, of course we won't expect him, is DeAndre Jordan. But what makes me happy, to your point, is DeAndre Jordan, I heard people say the only reason he gets all those easy shots is Chris Paul. Chris Paul is gone.
That's right.
And I love Lou Williams. Lou Williams is actually going to be one of my snubs, kind of. And what I'll say is, I love Lou Williams, but you would be a fool to say Lou Williams is anywhere close to Chris Paul. So that's what I like. We have these players that everybody says all they do is take easy shots. All they do is steal rebounds. And you go, if it was that easy to do, why don't more people do it? And then as soon as you remove some of the recipe, right? As soon as you remove Chris Paul, they still do it. To your point, Tyson Chandler bounced around the league and did it in multiple teams. So I agree.
And you just have to trust us on this here, because it seems like we're using an anecdote versus an anecdote. But if you look at the numbers, these kinds of players are consistent regardless of who they play with. Rebounds
and then this was an article from Krishna Narsu, at the rim defense. So basically these bigs that we seem to overvalue, the stuff that they are good at is among the most consistent year to year. But the All-Star game, my snubs gets really easy, Brian. So we were talking this a lot pre-show. My basic metric is if I got my druthers, you would put a bar on production. You would say to get into the NBA All-Star game must be at least this tall to enter. And I would probably say that bar would be 150 wins per 48 or 150. So that would be, about a 10 win a year player if they played full minutes. And if we did that to this year's crop of All-Stars, what you would essentially get is you would just knock out two players. You would knock out Kristaps Porzingis and your boy Klay Thompson. I think, DeMarcus Cousins, he is not on the same level. I would have put Capela in over. If I had the vote, I would have put Clint Capela over DeMarcus Cousins. I would have put DeAndre Jordan over DeMarcus Cousins if we're looking for a center. Obviously, I would have put Karl Anthony Towns. He did get a reserve slot, but I would have put Karl Anthony Towns over DeMarcus Cousins. Anybody that would take DeMarcus Cousins over Karl Anthony Towns is crazy. That's very ableist.
Towns thankfully did make it.
It's full of it, I'll put it that way. DeMarcus, what's interesting is the one defense people give of DeMarcus Cousins, I've harped on this for years, is his defense. He has never been on a good defensive squad. I'm not saying he's not good at defense. I'm just saying it's remarkable that for as good at defense as people allege he is, his teams have never been good at defense. But anyway, so to that point, those are the only players I'd really necessarily pull off. That's not saying there aren't a lot of people that could go in legitimately. I'm just saying those are the ones I'd pull off. One player I just love, and I'm not saying he is the most deserving. That was what we were talking pre-show, is essentially I am okay with not necessarily going for the best players into the All-Star game. I am okay with going for above this level of production in any narrative you want to give. So, for instance, Nikola Jokic didn't make it. Admittedly, he's going to be a little lower on the list. I think he's top 25 in the league, not quite top 10. Yeah, about that.
In wins produced?
Yeah, he's right below Chris Paul.
Yeah, let's bring it up.
Now, we were talking about this pre-show. There's a very obvious reason that Nikola Jokic got snubbed, so to speak, and I do think he was snubbed. And it just boils down to the Nuggets and the same stuff we were yelling at Kid for. Nikola Jokic, this season, is averaging 31.1 minutes per game. That is ridiculous. I certainly understand in the modern era of conditioning and resting your players, and there might be, so I'll at least throw up my hands and say I'm not 100% sure that he doesn't have asthmatic conditions or whatever. But that being said, if the Nuggets want to win, if they played Jokic closer to normal starters minutes, like 36 minutes a game, they would be better and his numbers would look better, right? I mean, per 36 minutes, he is putting up 18.7 points per game. So it's not hard to see that if you played him 36 minutes, he'd be closer to 20 points. He's at 16.2 per game right now. So there's that. There's an obvious reason. So there are lots of narratives for people you'd put in. Obviously, Steve Adams, a person you brought up, I'm sure you'll bring it up.
I was just about to mention him. That's a big one.
Dean Oliver has one where Steven Adams he likes Chris Paul. We do too. Now, Chris Paul, here was an interesting one. I'm okay with dumping Chris Paul with the logic of he's missed too many games. Now, for instance, there are other awards such as the, scoring title to be a league leader in scoring. You have to either be so good at rebounding or scoring that you just outshine everybody else, or you have to play a certain number of games to be eligible for the category. Chris Paul has missed, 12, 13 games at this point. So it's hard to do it. But basically I'm saying I'm okay saying he just hasn't played enough games to be eligible. The one player he put in there that I probably don't agree with, and we kind of mentioned this pre-show too, Brian, but I've said for a while, the wins produced formula is has a recipe component, which is the position adjustment. We automate that based on a feed from Yahoo Sports we get for positions. I would like to improve that. So we consider Paul George more of a big. Basketball Reference considers him more of a small forward. So if you considered Paul George a small forward, I don't think he's as good as Dean Oliver says he is, but he would cross my Dre threshold. So, for instance, I would be okay giving basically the only player I'd kick off of each team, Klay Thompson, Kristaps Porzingis, and I would say, Paul George is fine. Nikola Jokic is fine. We love Tyreke Evans. We'll just give a shout out to these pieces. Dave Barry helped assist on 2 Forbes pieces, the most overpaid and most underpaid players in the NBA. Admittedly, I actually have disagreements with the methodology for that. I mean, I understand it's a clickbaity piece. It's a fun piece, but when you talk about assigning a contract, right? If a player gets a multi-year contract, how they're playing in year 4 doesn't necessarily mean they're getting paid too much for that year, because like LeBron James, if you pay him a 4-year deal and he gets you 20 wins, 15 wins, 5 wins, yeah, that last year is going to look like you're overpaying him, but you got 60 wins over 4 years, which is fantastic. But that being said, Tyreke Evans showed up in that article as underpaid. Chris Paul, the person I would put in, like I said, if I had my druthers, is Lou Williams. So out west, drop Klay Thompson, add in Lou Williams. Out east, you've got Kristaps Porzingis. The easy one is Andre Drummond. I put Andre Drummond in for Kristaps Porzingis. That's really my only change to the All-Star game at this point.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I like that you're naming your criteria for who should be in the game, which is just can't be terrible, and otherwise it's just whoever the fans want, right? I think that's great. I've written this article a few times, which is just who had the best body of work in the first half, and if it was purely based on bat. I got this idea from Devin Dignam. I think he originally wrote this article a few times, but that's another way to look at it, and I haven't looked in deep to that yet. But one thing we talked about in the pre-show is that we perennially kind of hate LaMarcus Aldridge, and I pointed him out, and you said something to the effect of, well, the Spurs are a good team, they have to have somebody. Well, for me, that would be Kyle Anderson. I think he's probably been the best Spur so far this year. He kind of has a weird position thing too. But Drummond and DeAndre Jordan are kind of perennially underrated at this point. They've been, top 10, if not top 5 players the last few seasons in the NBA, and they can't even make an all-star team. It's tough.
We'll throw this out. You did a great job with Crumpled Jumper.
Yeah, let's look at that one right now.
Who basically just noted the criteria is 20 points per game, and then you factor in some level of winning team or big market, right? Kristaps Porzingis is in because he's in New York. Klay Thompson is in because he's on the winningest squad in the NBA. This is a much, we're already, I think, 15 over or whatever, over an hour. But there's a very interesting rabbit hole that I have I've talked about this problem before. I call it like the NBA League Pass Director, where I note that the people that try and say, just watch the game to you, the issue they have is that they are beholden to whatever the person filming the game decides to show them. And primarily that person is going to focus the camera on the person with the ball. They're not going to focus it on the bench. They're not going to focus it on the referees. They're not going to focus it on all of the players. So there are times, like the example I gave in the article I did on that, is that there are players that drop out of frame. And so you don't realize that this player is guarding a guy or this guy is boxing someone out. They drop out of frame. So you say, I watch the games and I know. And you don't realize that there is a built-in bias based on where the camera is pointing. And then additionally, the box score has a built-in bias. The fact that we have points in the very rightmost column, so we've learned, right, the most important column is the rightmost column in a table. That's something everybody should know. And the fact that we count by 2s for points instead of counting by 1s. And this like I've mentioned this is what makes hockey interesting compared to football and basketball. In football and basketball, they wanted to do fractions. A field goal is worth half of a touchdown. A free throw is worth half of a made basket, right? Remember, originally the three-pointer wasn't in existence. So when they added that, though, they were basically saying a three-pointer is worth a basket plus a free throw. Instead of doing it fractionally, which would have made sense, but admittedly would have been confusing, going 0.5, 1, 1.5, they just upped the scale. And because they upped the scale and they put it rightmost, we are tricked into believing that points are the most important thing. In hockey, they count assists and points the same, in the same thing. And we notice that the players that get the credit, we would have players like DeAndre Jordan and Draymond Green. Did I say DeAndre Drummond?
Drummond. You got it, DeAndre Jordan.
DeAndre Jordan, Andre Drummond. I combine their names sometimes.
Should we just start saying DeAndre Drummond to be the perennially underrated center? Is that a new meme?
DeAndre Drummond Award? Yeah, I love it. So that's just the point. So I really like this Crumple Jumper tweet that you brought to my attention, which basically just says, here's
and
the
this is the @CrumpleJumper Twitter account, by the way. I think it's just one guy, and he writes for Nile and Calcus. But anyway, go ahead, Dre.
All right, that's all I have there. It's much easier. I mean, basically, if you've listened to this show for years, you've heard me just over the years, I've slowly just gotten eroded on the AllStar debate where you can see like I'm the Democratic Party where I'm like, you know what, fine, just they just have to not be bad. If they're an okay player, they can go. I used to be like, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know who they're voting for. They're terrible. This is wrong. DeAndre Jordan is getting snubbed. Andre Drummond's getting snubbed. And now I'm like,
so is this your analogy, Dre? Is Lou Williams the Hillary Clinton of NBA All-Stars?
No, Lou Williams belongs like LaMarcus Aldridge is.
Oh, but you're just saying, he's kind of fine, so he can just be our candidate, right? That's what Democrats did with Clinton.
All right. This is what I get for bringing a basketball analogy. You actually know politics way more than I. Okay, I don't want to get too much into trade rumors. There's just too much. If Kemba Walker's on the table, the Nuggets should go for him. I don't believe the Kawhi Leonard trade rumors. I think that's just Jalen Rose making stuff up on a show. If it happens, I'll be curious on it, but we'll stick a pin in that. Last point I'll give out is Sloan. I'll actually be attending Sloan this year. That's the 24th of February. It's the first one I've gone to in, I think, 3 years. I'd gone 3 years running. I just life got in the way. And now that I have a kid, I figure that makes it much easier to do the weekend. But I'm going to Sloan this year. One of the things we got famous for when we did a few years is shirts. I have one idea for the Celtics, one idea for the Warriors. I may need to discuss with you more, Brian, about a Warriors idea. And then I may need a third shirt idea. So if you have any suggestions for T-shirts you'd like to see me wear at Sloan, let me know. I might buy an extra one or two just to give out or something. But if you're heading to Sloan, let me know. I'll be there. Just that, not on any panels or anything, just as an attendee. But figured I'd shoot that out, and maybe I'll preview some of the shirts I'll be wearing when I'm there. I threw out my shout-outs intermittently during the show, Brian. So if you have any shout-outs, I say go for it. And then if that's the case, we can wrap it up.
No, I'll just say one thing about Sloan, which is funny, is that people are complaining this year that the fee is $850. And all that, I mean, I'm not going to say if that's good or bad, but, to me, like there's like kind of hobbyist conventions you can go to that are either free or like $20 or $40 or whatever. And then there's like business conventions that can be $1,000, several $1,000s. You can buy a booth and all that. So it seems clear to me that Sloan, based on that price point, has moved into being a business convention and not a hobbyist convention. That's obvious based on what people say in general, and that, it's kind of like a meat market for analytics folks. But yeah. I think the price point is indicative. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, it's supply. I mean, I hate being the cold calculating egghead, but things like, so I'll give an example, just an arbitrary rant to end on, Brian. I was, when we see people get fired from jobs, there's the internet outrage machine. And there are times where I disagree with the firing, and there are times when I agree with the firing. But regardless, if we look at the laws in the United States and how the past 40 years have gone towards union busting and labor laws, et cetera, basically we're an at-will country with a lot of contractors where it is perfectly legal to fire someone for basically no reason, right? As long as you're not discriminating. And then to get even harsher, the current administration is trying to, get rid of some of those things
but
as
well. If
well.
you are being discriminated on, you can be bought out by an NDA.
Yeah. Well, and NDAs get weird. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just saying, if you actually are aware of the laws and terms, you can go, I don't like this, but this is just how it is. And so the same is true of economics, right? Where you go, I don't like that the price for this latte I used to get was $1 when it was a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop that no one went to. But now that the neighborhood is gentrified and it's right next to a tech sector and Starbucks bought it out, it's now $5. I don't like that, but that's how things are. So it is a good and bad thing for Sloan. It is successful, which means more people go. It is, as you mentioned, very businessy, which means basically people can send people that can afford business price point. We were talking about this way earlier in the show. Thanks for the call back, Brian. We were talking about how like ESPN, if ESPN brings legitimacy to the basically digital market, that's good, but that's going to drive up the price point. That's going to change things. That's going to push people out. The same thing has basically happened to Sloan. Sloan, and I mean, let's just be fair. Sloan was already happening at the MIT School of Business.
Yeah.
It was basically initially was a favor to Daryl Morey, but it's not surprising that with its growing,
he went to school there, right? That's the whole connection.
But so the point being, that's just what's happened. I don't have to like it. I agree the price point's high. Arturo and I, when we both last attended, basically discussed how a lot of the papers were basically using proprietary data that most people attending couldn't have access to, which was basically shoving out some analysts from even contributing to Sloan. I don't have to like these things, but I can accept them as the way they are. That being said, I'm just going to have a fun time out there meeting people. And then last, this is not really a shout out, but a bitch, whatever you want to call that. But what I was going to say is, so I'm going to spoil this, Patrick, because I can't do it. Sue Bird is going to be attending Sloan. I am so freaking happy about that. And I said to myself, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go buy a Sue Bird jersey. I'm going to try and get her to sign it at Sloan. I'm going to give it to Patrick as a gift. So that was the plan. It might still happen, Patrick, but I'm letting you know it's way far out there. I could not find a Sue Bird jersey online. And then what I did, I went on Amazon and looked for Sylvia Fowles, the reigning MVP and finals MVP, and I could not find anything on Amazon. Amazon actually asked me if I meant author Sylvia Fowler. So basically what I'll just say is when you're talking supply and demand, for freak's sake, the NBA, WNBA, they're not filling their demand for merch for people who are actual fans. So that's kind of tangentially related to Sloan, kind of my complaint there.
To tie this all together, Dre, with Sloan and ESPN, ESPN is presenting Sloan this year. They are the title sponsor. So there you go. I'm really happy you're going. I didn't think that any of you guys were going this year, so I'm very excited to hear back from you and do a reporting show or whatever we end up doing, seeing your writing about it.
Oh, now I have to just give me homework. All right.
Oh, you weren't going to write about it? Oh, just kidding. Dre is not going to Sloan this year.
I think I kind of have.
We're not going to talk about it.
Right. Well, at the very least, maybe we'll do a couple podcasts or something. All right. Well, anyway, that's been our show. We went long, definitely, but that's fine. It's a fun show.
Thanks for staying late, Dre.
Jason Kidd firing really added about 20 minutes to this show that we anticipating, which is funny because you sent out the script and the script was full, and I was like, how the heck is Jason Kidd getting fired? Not on. But anyway, this has been the Boxscore Geeks show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Produced as always by Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Co-host in spirit, even though not here in ethereal form, Patrick Mint. You can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. We go live every week, usually 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. We did it this week, Brian. So proud. You can catch that live at twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Look for us on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks show. I think I got everything in there. If I didn't, apologies. We'll talk to you next time.